For the broom handle, I'm using a bamboo skewer. I'm making a 1/12 scale broom and the diameter of the skewer is too big, so I'm using a utility knife to remove some of the bulk. You can also just use sandpaper to make the skewer smaller, but the utility knife removes more material and helps it go a little faster. The end of the skewer is really blunt, so to make it look more realistic, I used a little bit of sandpaper to round off the end. With just a couple minutes effort, my broom handle is done, so I cut it to 3 1/4 inches. You can see how much thinner the sanded stick is than the original. You can use the bamboo skewer as it is, but your broom will lack a little bit of realism because the handle will be out of scale. Before I add the bristles to the broom, I need to stain it. I'm using watered down brown acrylic paint. To get a stained look, I brushed on the paint and then wiped off the excess. The color was a bit too light, so I did it several times to create layers. For the bristles of my broom, I'm using some jute rope, but you could also use embroidery floss or yarn. I cut a section of rope about 2 inches long and used a Dollar Tree clip to hold the end. The pieces of yarn and the rope are twisted, so I used my fingers to untwist them a bit. To help separate the fibers and straighten them a little more, I used a pointy tool. This tool is meant for removing cut vinyl pieces from a Cricut machine, but you can use any tool that can get in between the fibers. I tried a plastic comb for combing out the yarn, but it was too weak, but you could try a pet brush if you have one on hand. My fibers look a little wavy right now, but once the broom is completed, they'll look nice and straight. After just about 30 seconds, I had done a good enough job, but I went in with a toothbrush to separate the fibers even more. I'm only showing 2, but I did 3 of these clumps for the broom I made. The amount you'll need will depend on the thickness of your rope and the desired fullness of your broom. Now I'm adding the bristles to the handle. To corral my yarn fibers, I used a twist tie to tie off the end. Then I cut off the excess and started applying water-based glue. I'm choosing the easiest method of applying the bristles to the broom. The fibers I chose for my bristles will attach really nicely to the wooden handle, only using glue. Alternately, you could use wire or thread to lash the bristles to the broom handle, but this is easier and more reliable. Once the glue is applied, I do the rather messy step of just pressing the bristles up against the broom handle. I'm making sure all of the bristles are in contact with one another and the bamboo skewer. I sped up the dry time with a hairdryer and removed the twist tie. At this point of making this broom, I had only spent about 15 minutes on it, so it's a very quick process. Once I removed the twist tie, I flattened out the bristles a little bit and fanned them out like a broom. Now I'm using a full-size technique and sewing these bristles together like you would see on a corn broom. I'm using my clips to flatten out the bristles and fan them out. I'm flattening out the bristles in preparation for sewing. Here's the first option for completing this technique. I'm using a single strand of regular sewing thread. I wrap the thread around the top part of the broom and use my tweezers to pull it through. Then I double knot it, which creates this loop of thread around the top of the bristles. I create 2 knots because I'm cutting off the excess thread and I don't want it to unravel. This is optional, but I use a little bit of white glue on either side to keep the thread in place as I sew it. This loop is an anchor and I'll sew around it. I threaded a needle with the same thread and starting on one end, I brought it up through the end of the bristles to hide the knot. Do this lightly because if you pull too hard, the knot may come all the way through. Then I put the needle through the back over the looped thread to create a stitch. I made 3 of these stitches for the top part of my broom. To finish it off, I flip it over toward the back and put the needle underneath a piece of thread and tie a simple double knot. Then I cut off the excess closely. The first method creates a single thread loop. This next method creates a double thread. For this next method, I threaded a needle and knotted it at the end. Then I put the pointed tip of the needle through the loop at the end and pull it tight. Then I slide the loop to where I would like it to sit under the first row of stitching. To create the stitches, you go in through the back, down through the front over the loop, and then you come in from the back again and down through the front. You can make as many or few stitches as you'd like. I made 4 on this row. The simple added step of sewing the broom in a similar manner as you would see in a full-size broom adds a lot of realism and makes the bristles more secure. Once you're finished sewing, you can cut your bristles however you would like. Here I'm showing you how it looks if you cut them at an angle. But I ultimately like the look of cutting the bristles straight across. If you like the look at this point, you can add some wire or black thread to the top to make it look like that's what's keeping the bristles on the handle. To make a mop, you repeat the same steps for the handle and grab some yarn. Then cut the yarn about 2 inches long. We'll trim a little excess off later. I'm using a little bit of white glue to attach the yarn to the handle, and I'm adding the yarn facing the wrong direction. The glue helps secure the yarn, but I also tie a piece of yarn around it and double knot it. When I fold it down, it gives you that classic mop look. I use a Dollar Tree clip to corral the yarn and use another piece of yarn to tie around it. I cut off the excess closely at the top, and for the other one, I leave the excess long. To shape the yarn, I added a bit of watered down glue. I trimmed the excess before shaping. Then I sit it on a surface it won't stick to and shape it so it looks like it's wet and sitting on the floor. Check out this next video if you'd like to see how to transform it into a puddle mop and make a bucket of water.